Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, August 31st, 2022, and I'm rushing to say that because I am baffled by the results that have just been released from the state of Alaska that show the Democrat, Mary Peltola, has officially won the special election and flipped a red district, or rather red state, to being blue for the first time in over 50 years. Now, since 1973, the state of Alaska has been in Republican control by Representative Don Young. He unfortunately passed away just early this year, and as a result, a special election was prompted in which his vacancy would be fulfilled. It ultimately ended up with 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans in the top 4 primary that advanced to the general election, and through the general election, the Democrat actually came out ahead and has officially won this special election. Now, the reason why that's so significant is because this is the state of Alaska. In no reality should Alaska be a blue state. In fact, when you take a look at the 2020 election results, you find that President Trump won by 10 points statewide. Knowing that this is a Trump state, knowing that this is a Republican state, people should not expect the Democrats, especially in a year such as this one, to even come close to winning, much less actually winning the race. The state of Alaska, as I said, has been in Republican control dating all the way back for decades on end. You first find the 1976 map here where Representative Don Young won 42% of the vote. And in every single election since then, the state of Alaska has been pretty solid for the Democratic Party. The last time in 2020, going to the Republicans by 9. In 2016, in the last presidential election prior to that, went to the Republicans by 14. I mean, when you go through the map, you go through the state of Alaska, and what do you find? It's been solid and locked down for the GOP for literally decades on end. Now that the Democrats have officially flipped a congressional district, it has shown that the Democratic Party, at least, is experiencing something very different from what many people were expecting just months ago. When the Dobbs decision was released, we knew that was a turning point for the Democratic Party, but we never knew to what extent that it would be a turning point. The state of Alaska had a special election, but this was never supposed to be the indicator race. The state of New York was, and that showed favorable for the Democratic Party. We also looked to the Minnesota election, the Kansas election, the Nebraska election, and every single one, without failure, benefited the Democratic Party and showed an advancement relative to the last election. This is a super big deal. This is the biggest thing that I honestly think has happened during the entirety of this election cycle. Throw out Pat Ryan, throw out all of the competitive races, throw out the abortion referendum as the most, most influential indicator about a change in support, about a change in party policy and party identity. Because looking at the results in the state of Alaska, the Democratic Party flipping this 50-year plus red state is absolutely super significant. It is exceptionally out of the ordinary. And for Democrats to do it this well is quite shocking. We assumed this race was going to be within a few percentage points, and that it was. But to see that the Democrat won by about 4 points statewide is so important, because it means that it wasn't down to just the narrowest of margins. It was down to about a 6,000 vote margin, which is honestly quite significant, knowing that the state of Alaska should have never gone towards the Democratic Party. Mary Peltola's victory comes again as something that really shocks the country, but honestly is showing a change and difference in tide and direction for these midterm elections. The House election in Alaska was never expected again to go towards the Democrats. In fact, looking at the polling data, there actually were some victories there for them, but the predictions were likely and safe are. Even the most accurate predictor from the 2020 election, Larry Sabato's crystal ball, at least on the presidential level, rated it as safe Republican. Inside elections and the Cook Political Report were a bit more accurate in a likely Republican characterization, but none of them indicated that Democrats might come out ahead. And that's exactly what happened. Looking at the polls, however, I will say that this honestly was predicted. Looking at the 2 polls that were taken following Al Gross removing himself from the race, you found that in both of them, they expected the final event to be between Sarah Palin and Mary Peltola. And in this final breakdown, actually, what you found was not that there was a race between the two, but in the matchup between the two, they found that in these scenarios, Mary Peltola ended up winning. Against Nick Begich, however, that simply was not the case. And this tells you that had Nick Begich been able to make it to the general election, sure, he might have won. And I honestly think that would have been the truth. But looking at what actually happened, it is clear that Trump's influence in endorsing Sarah Palin, her own influence as the former governor, was enough to sink the Republican Party's chances at victory in this election. It was clear in the results that we saw from these Alaskan ballots that Sarah Palin was so exceptionally disliked. Sarah Palin only got 50% of the ballots that were moving on beyond Nick Begich. 50% of the Republican. Mary Peltola got 28%, and 21% simply did not rank a second choice. That wasn't enough for Sarah Palin in order to win the election, and I watched this live. I watched the results be counted live by the Alaska Board of Elections, in which the Democrat won by 6,000 votes. But it was very clear that once Begich was eliminated, that Mary Peltola was going to win, because we saw how many ballots were removed altogether and how few went to Sarah Palin, at least relative to what you would expect for another Republican nominee. Had this been a one-on-one race, I don't think the results would have been different. But I think that maybe if Nick Begich was the nominee, the results would have been as well. The question is now, what does this mean for the national environment? What does this mean for Democrats and Republicans across the nation? Because quite literally, in every single special election, including this one, the Democratic Party has shocked the nation. This one more than anyone. And looking at the approval rating of President Biden narrowing up nationwide, especially amongst likely or registered voters, looking at the generic ballot improve and increase for the Democratic Party nationwide, nothing here tells me that the Democratic Party is on track for a resounding defeat. In fact, they are on track for a resounding victory in the U.S. Senate, and the House is now in play. The state of Alaska was, again, never expected to be competitive, but the fact that it went to the Democrat means that there's something interesting going on. The Democrat had about a 14% chance of victory moving into the general election, and based off of the chances in this actual primary and in this early race, the chances for the Democratic Party were decreased, likely Republican and safe Republican. Nobody expected it. But this is the same characterization that the state of New York's 23rd district shared, or Nebraska's 1st district, or Minnesota's 1st district, in which the races either went to the Democrats or went to the Republicans by just single digits and narrowed down significantly relative to the last race and the last presidential race. Knowing that and knowing these ratings makes me question, do these ratings hold the same weight and accuracy that they once did? Do the ratings, such as the one from FiveThirtyEight that gives Republicans an 86% chance of victory in some of these races, hold true if they ended up going towards the Democrats? When you take a look at the map, it becomes less easy to believe that some of these districts where the Republican has a 76% chance of victory, or a 76, or even narrower than that, 68, are still going to the GOP. Because what the special elections have proven is that even the most solid races moved closer than they were before. And some of the more solid races for the Democratic Party, less solid races for the GOP, still ended up going to them, sometimes by very narrow margins, or sometimes went towards the Democrats. If Mary Peltola was able to win this race with practically a very similar chance at winning the general election, about 14%, the predicted markets had her at about 30%, knowing that versus the actual results tells me that Democrats are considered the underdog in many, many races. But guess what happens? Guess what happens in that circumstance? The Democrats seem to be prevailing. Minnesota's 1st congressional district, Brad Finstad is expected to win by 16 points in the general election. In this special election, he won by just single digits, by about 5 to 6 points. Nebraska's 1st congressional district, that one's expected to go to the GOP by a margin of about 17 points. You know what happened in that special election? It narrowed up to about 5. New York's 23rd congressional district, the GOP was expected to win here by a margin, let's see if we can find it here, by a margin of about 23 points. It ended up being a 6-point race. So altogether, what we know from these competitive districts, what we know from these competitive races, and yes, some of them drawn under new lines versus old ones, but altogether, generally speaking, many of these districts do tend to be very similar as they are now. The Democratic Party has prevailed in many instances, and all of it seems to be indicating that 2022 simply is not a red wave year. If we were to isolate these special elections and we were to treat them with some type of nonpartisan election analysis, removing ourselves from the national environment we are in right now, if I was to guess where we were nationally based off these special election results, I would bring us back to 2018 in terms of this polling cycle. But honestly, Even the Democrats in 2018 did not flip Alaska. They would not have been able to flip Alaska. And that's the problem. The state of Alaska should have been entirely untouched by the Democratic Party. It should never even have been in contention. This was a district, this was a state that had not moved for quite literally 50 consecutive years. GOP victory after GOP victory after GOP victory, Republican to Republican to Republican to Republican, never once breaking from that mold, no matter who decided to run for Congress. Even in beneficial years for the Democratic Party like 2018, Don Young still won by 7 points statewide. But fast forward to 2022, in a year where President Biden is down double digits nationwide, where the Democrats are about 7 points worse off in the generic ballot than where they were in 2018, about 6 points off from where they were back in 2020. Knowing that, yet for some reason the state of Alaska, as did many other states, defy expectations, vote for the Democratic Party in a way that will go down in history as an overwhelming and resounding victory for the Democratic Party in a very long time. The state of Alaska should have never been this competitive, and the fact that it is quite shocking, to say the least. I will say, though, I believe that in the general election, you will see the race probably go in a different direction. I think that the Republicans will realize that Sarah Palin is not the right nominee to advance to the general election, and that it should be Nick Begich. Will that actually persuade voters? Who knows, right? That's the question, because once they actually rank in November, that's when it matters. But as of right now, I will say that Mary Peltola will head into the general election also as the incumbent, which will help her in this race. Because if she can change some minds, if she can utilize this efforts in Alaska, this efforts as the outgoing congresswoman, it will help the Democratic Party win the general election. And that will be very substantial. I think when we look to the general, we should see what the messaging is between Palin and Begich. I also think there's a good chance that Palin decides to drop out of the race because she already lost this one. But she hates Nick Begich so much, she honestly might stay into it and continue to campaign. Sarah Palin all but indicated that she ranked Mary Peltola as her second choice, so maybe there's also a chance that those who are supporting Sarah Palin might do the same. I think it's a very, very wide guess. I don't think that it's anything that we can rely on or really expect to see in the general election, but I do think that there is something to be said about that as well. I don't know what's going to happen for the future of Alaska politics, but we are in uncharted territory here. Again, for the first time since 1973, the Democrats now control the state of Alaska at large in the House. This is a flip in a red wave year. Everything here is baffling me. I mean, I am even having trouble myself comprehending the results that I see on my screen. Because to see a Democrat winning in Alaska in a year so unfavorable towards them means that something is off about the expectation for November. 2 new polls, actually 3 new polls that have been released just for the past few days. Economist YouGov, Democrats +8 in the generic ballot. Quinnipiac University, Democrats +4. Politico Morning Consult, Democrats +5. This is the type of energy, this is the type of lead the Democrats need in order to maintain this momentum. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that what we are going to see is the generic ballot revert, but I have been wrong every step leading up to this one. I never put forth my prediction in the state of Alaska because I didn't think that I was going to be able to accurately predict the way that it was going to go. I think partially it was telling me that Alaska was going to go blue, that Sarah Palin was so unpopular, but then again I looked at it and said, what Republican is willing to vote for a Democrat over Sarah Palin, even if it is Sarah Palin? But it is very clear that the people in Alaska care enough to vote against the GOP, vote against the Republicans in a year that is supposed to be so favorable towards them. The Democrats have definitely made major headwaves. They have definitely been able to change the narrative about the midterm elections. And that's what's important here. Because if the Democrats go into November with a revitalized energy, seeing that their enthusiasm and their ability to win elections is actually translating into victories, Democrats are going to do a lot better than they otherwise might have. The House may be in play in the next month or so, and the Democratic Party should be very grateful for that. Because for the first time in forever, it looks like everything is on the up and up for the Democratic Party, especially with these special election victories, election after election after election, all helping the Democratic Party expand where they were before and helping them win in regions of the nation where they otherwise had no shot in the past prior to now. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today. Sorry, tomorrow.